Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today we continue with the book of Daniel and we're on to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is a very momentous chapter in the book of Daniel and we will see why. So let's get into it. So, reading from verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps would give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then Daniel became distinguished above all the other officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. The king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a grounds for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." I'm going to pause here for a second. I'll deal with Darius, but before I deal with Darius, let me deal with Daniel. If you remember the beginning of the book of Daniel, Daniel was taken away from the kingdom of Judah as a young man. He was in the first group of captives taken from Judea. He was essentially taken as, for lack of a better term, he was essentially a slave in Babylon. And he worked so well so that people recognized the excellent spirit in him. We are Christians. And if you call yourself a Christian, the word Christian wasn't created by Christians. The word Christians were created by opponents of Christians. And it means Christ-like, or those people who are Christ-like. Those people who act a particular way. And it comes back to bearing the name. God created man in his image and his likeness. Man went astray. And God wants to bring us all back. And what does God say? Do not bear the name in vain, or do not bear the name improperly. If you're a Christian, you are essentially a representative of God. You're a representative of Yahweh. I prefer to use the word Yahweh because there are many gods. So I want everyone to know who I'm talking about. So you're a representative of Yahweh. So yes, it's difficult. Yes, the world is full of people who are difficult to deal with. But when you have opportunities, do all you have to do. When you have a job, do your job to the best of your ability as if you are answering to Yahweh. You're not necessarily going to the job to curry favor, to suck up, to whatever. Because if you look at Daniel's track history, this, by the way, is the last chapter in Daniel that deals with history. From chapter 7 on, it's all about prophecy. So this is the last historical chapter of Daniel. But if you look in the past, Daniel didn't suck up to Nebuchadnezzar or anyone else. He told everyone the truth, etc. People did not like him. But while people did not like him, they understood that he was honest, that he was capable, that he was committed, that he had integrity. In other words, he bore the name properly so that they could say, hey, we can't find any grounds for complaint with him. We can't find him in fraud. We can't find him in laziness. We can't find him incompetent. But you know what fault we could find? We could find a problem when it comes to the law of his God. Not to the law of God, or to the law of the Jews' God, or to the law of his God, because he represents that God. And as Christians, you have a job. Do the job as if you are answering directly to Yahweh. So do the job to the best of your ability. You don't have to. There are some who, when a supervisor or manager or director is around, they appear to be working, and when they're not, when they believe no one's looking at them, they don't work. No. Do the job as if Yahweh is looking at you all the time, that you answer to Yahweh, because you do. The highest priority in your life, if you are a follower of Yahweh, if you are a follower of Christ, is to represent him. Representing him don't mean that you are a pushover and everybody's supposed to like you. In fact, many people will dislike you. Jesus said that. But they must find no fault in what you do. So when you are in a job or in a position or whatever, do it to the best of your ability. And when you do it to the best of your ability, Yahweh will cause you to be promoted, and Yahweh will prosper you. And this is what we saw here. The 120 satraps. Satraps are like governors. And over these governors, there were 3. We can call them, let's call them presidents or whatever, or prime ministers. 3 senior ministers over these guys. And Darius, the king of Babylon at the time, wanted to make a position for Daniel to be the head over all of them. And guess what he eventually did? He did. And Daniel became the head of the governing group in Babylon called the Megistanes. I dealt with that in my video about Christmas. And that Megistanes, that's why that group, that's why those magi, those wise men came to look for Jesus when he was born. That started with Daniel. That started here. Daniel was made the Rab Mag, the head over this ruling group in Babylon. So this group here, 120, plus 2 leaders, didn't like Daniel. It's jealousy. So they decided, let's find a way to get rid of Daniel, because we're jealous of him, he's working too well. So let's find a way. So let's go to find a way that Darius, the king, will remove him. Let's continue. Now, many people like to attack the book of Daniel. And I've spoken about it in other chapters. I mean, they attack it, and as far as I'm concerned, as far as everyone's concerned, if you're unbiased, they fall flat on their face. So one issue is, who is this Darius? Some people will tell you it's Darius the Great. This can't be Darius the Great. This is too early for Darius the Great. And even the passage says the guy is not Darius the Great. Darius the Great had a different father. They said this guy, his father was named Ahasuerus. Okay? So let's look at this Darius. Now, what people don't understand, and what makes it a little complex, is that some of these kingdoms used to name people the same thing over and over and over and over. All right? In fact, it happens today. There's King Charles in England. You know how many Charles there have been? There was Queen Elizabeth in England. In our lifetime, there were 2 Queen Elizabeths, Elizabeth and her mother. Right? So they tend to have the same names over and over. In addition to which, sometimes names are titles. So Darius is actually also a title. It's like Pharaoh. Pharaoh is a title. Caesar was a title, at least after the first one, right? Kaiser is a title that comes from Caesar. Tsar is a title that came from Caesar. So Darius was also, it's a name, yes, but it was also a title. And what it means was he who holds the scepter, or he who holds the rulership, or he who holds the goodness. So Darius could be any number of people. Some believe that Darius was Cyrus himself, but it's generally understood that it couldn't be Cyrus because this Darius was appointed the king of Babylon. He didn't seize Babylon. If we remember from the last chapter, chapter 5, the last verse of chapter 5, it said that that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Or Darius the Mede was appointed as the king of Babylon. So Cyrus was the greater king who had other kingdoms to conquer, etc. And he gave the kingdom to someone who was then called Darius. And there are a number of people. The two people with the highest chance of being Darius, in my opinion, would be a guy named Gobaru, right? His Greek, the Greek form of Gobaru is Gobryas. He was the general that entered the city on that night. All right? He was the general who entered Babylon and took Babylon, denied Babylon fell. And the other guy who has a great chance of being Cyrus as well would be Astyages. Astyages, interestingly, his father's name was Cyaxares. And Cyaxares turned into Hebrew can be Ahasuerus. But these are the two guys who has the greatest chance of being Darius the Mede. But the point is, this isn't Darius the Great. This is a bit earlier. But there was a Darius in the time of Josephus identifies him as someone else. Xenophon speaks about who he may be, etc. But, so these are the two guys who had the greatest chance of being Darius. Just a bit of trivia, right? But remember, it may be a title, he who holds the scepter. And this Darius was appointed and answered to Cyrus. Okay? So he was a king, but he was a king under a king. And Cyrus was the king of kings. In fact, the last king of Persia, right? Because keep in mind, Cyrus was a Persian. He was a Medo-Persian, but he started this Persian dynasty. And he would call himself the Shah. All right, the last king of Iran, whose name was previously Persia, was called the Shah. Well, Shah is actually short for Shahinshah, meaning king of kings. So Darius was a king, but he was a king that answered to a king. Let me go forward. So, okay, let's continue. So, reading from verse 6. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. So they're buttering him up. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king shall establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. Now, what happened here is that Cyrus got set up. They buttered him up. They said something and he said, oh yeah, that sounds good. And then later on, Darius realized that he got taken. He got set up. Now we saw in earlier chapters that Nebuchadnezzar answered to nothing and no one. Nebuchadnezzar was the highest law in the land. So he did whatever he wanted. That wasn't the case with Darius. Once there was a law, even the king had to follow that law. So when Darius signed this decree and made it law, there was nothing he could do to take it back, and he could not revoke the law. That was the law of the Medo-Persians. So Darius got set up here. Let's continue. All right. So by the way, so they found a way. They found a way, and that way was Daniel. Daniel petitioned. Daniel prayed constantly. So let's attack him through his faithfulness to his God. Let's continue. And from verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had his window in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. So as we see again, over and over in the book of Daniel, when a problem happens, Daniel don't fuss, Daniel don't worry, Daniel don't whatever. Daniel goes to God. Daniel goes to Yahweh. And if you go to Yahweh, you're not going to be ashamed. Faith isn't believing in something. Faith is relying on something. Okay? So Daniel realized he had a problem. Because one, it's God first, everything after. So even though there's a law that states I can't pray to my God, that law is wrong, because that law, all laws are under God's law. All. So this is a problem for me. The only person who could fix it one way or the other is Yahweh. So I'm going to Yahweh. All right. So the first thing Daniel did when he found out about this thing, when he found out that these leaders had conspired, go on to the king and lied and say all of us agreed with it. Never told him, hey, Daniel don't agree with this at all. In fact, we never even talked to Daniel. In fact, this is to basically get rid of Daniel and fool the king into doing, unjustly. Daniel didn't fuss, Daniel didn't fight, Daniel didn't quarrel, Daniel yet went to Yahweh. Let's continue from verse 11. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any God or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? Then the king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. They played with his ego and he got set up. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah. So Daniel, that slave boy that all you bring and have here so many years from Judah, who we conquered, who was conquered by the Babylonians, who then we conquered. So the Babylonians conquered Judah and brought these slaves over. And we have conquered Daniel, and we have conquered Babylon. And now this Daniel, who you guys have chosen to exalt so high, pays no attention to you, king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So the king of Babylon was entrapped. The king of Babylon. So they set up a trap and they just sprung it. Let's continue. Then the king, from verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. So the king realized he got set up. He would have been angry, But he was more distressed and angry because, unlike what we saw earlier with Nebuchadnezzar getting the big head and putting himself above God, above Yahweh, this King Darius was humble enough to realize God is real and this Daniel is with God. I played the fool here. Let me see how I could fix it. So he probably went to every senior man of the law in the kingdom to see how he can fix it. But he couldn't. He labored all day to see how he could reverse this thing so he don't have to kill Daniel. Didn't have to throw Daniel into the den of lions. But it didn't happen. Let's continue from verse 15. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Checkmate, king. We got here. You gotta get rid of Daniel. You gotta kill him. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. We didn't see this with Nebuchadnezzar. But this king apparently learned from all of that. I don't know. I'm pretty sure he would have heard about it. So he learned from all of that. He was trapped into condemning Daniel. But he and all is praying, May your God, who you serve continually, deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Some believe that the stone was brought so that Daniel couldn't escape. The king could have also been doing it so that no one could come and kill Daniel during the night and say that the lions did it. And then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and the sleep fled from him. I like this king. He humbled himself. Unlike what we saw earlier with Nebuchadnezzar, he humbled himself. He fasted all night for Daniel, believing that the God of Daniel will deliver him. He was trapped. He realized he was trapped. And he fasted. He humbled himself. He didn't sleep all night. He was stressed all night. Let's see the outcome. Then at break of day, the king arose. So all night he's just waiting for the sun to come up. The king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God. The king was a Medo-Persian. The Medo-Persians had the God. But he's saying, Daniel, you are the servant of the true God who is above all gods. Has your God humility? Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, Daniel, for all we know, Daniel woke up. All right? The king didn't sleep at night. Daniel probably had a good sleep. A lion probably lied down, and Daniel probably used the lion as a pillow for all we know. Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad, and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found upon him. He didn't have a scratch, because he trusted in his God, he trusted in Yahweh. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones into pieces. There were 120 satraps and 2 guys above the satraps. We don't know how many children they had, and we don't know how many wives they had. But it wouldn't be 120 people, it would be hundreds of people. Men, women, and children. And they were placed inside the den of lions, and they were destroyed. Stand before God. Be blameless before God, and God will take care of you. And also, if you're a God hater, be careful. Be careful if you try to set up people who are innocent. Because when judgment comes to you, it may not just fall on you. It may have a terrible knock-on effect for your family. So these people, the entire families lost their lives because they chose to try to set up and destroy someone who all he was doing was their job. They chose to stand up against Daniel and therefore stand up against God, because God had plans for Daniel that Daniel was doing, in addition to doing his job as best as he could. Let this be a lesson to everyone. If you're following Yahweh, do what you have to do to the best of your ability. And if you are not following Yahweh, don't believe in Yahweh, or whatever the case, don't try to set up people who are following Yahweh. Because in the end, it's going to come back to you, and it's going to come back harsh, and it may affect more than just you. But let's continue. And from verse 25, then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nation, and languages that dwelt in all the earth. Now, of course, all the earth don't literally mean all the earth. It means all the kingdoms that the Persians had control over. Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and he rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Now let me touch on this a bit. Remember, in the Persian Empire, once a king makes a decree, no other king can turn it around. No other king can abrogate it. No other king can cancel it. That's the law of the Persians. So what did he state here? And what he stated is that you couldn't, just like that, seek to persecute the people who follow the God of Daniel. This was a decree, this was a law. And although in Esther we see another king being set up to try to kill all the Jews, and he couldn't turn that around. They used a loophole on him. But because of this decree, they used a loophole on him, and he used the loophole saying, let all the Jews arm themselves and kill anyone who wants to harm them. But this king here, Darius, because of this decree, even when the Jews were persecuted, because right after the Persians came the Greeks, came Alexander. And Alexander died at 31 or thereabouts. And his kingdom was split into four pieces, his four generals. And the general who ended up in charge of the area where Judah is, where Israel is, not necessarily him, but his descendants hated the Jews. His descendants persecuted the Jews. One of his descendants, Antiochus Epiphanes, he essentially did the thing that is called and became the template for the abomination of desolation that we'll see in the times at the end, in the end times, just before Jesus comes, during the tribulation. Right? And when the Jews were being persecuted, where did they run to? They ran to Babylon. There's a Babylonian Talmud. Even in times of Rome, yes, the Persian Empire eventually collapsed. They were defeated by the Greeks, but they later kind of reformed and became the Parthian Empire. And the Parthian Empire kept most of the laws of the Persian Empire. Alright? And Rome, the mighty all-conquering Rome, the legs of iron, if you remember the Metal Kingdom statue, was never able to defeat Parthia. Parthian policies caused it to implode. And there were successor kingdoms to Parthia. But the Romans were never able to defeat Parthia. So which is why when the Magi, when Jesus was born, came to Jerusalem to find the Christ child, everybody in Jerusalem was afraid, because it wasn't three guys on camels. If you go back and check that my video on what the Bible says about Christmas, it was an army that came with these kingmakers, that came with the Magi. Right? Rome, in fact, Rome was defeated a few times heavily by the Parthians. So there was a cold war and a firm boundary between Rome and the Parthians. The Parthians didn't really want to fight Rome, but Rome definitely didn't want to fight the Parthians too much. And when Christians started to be persecuted in the early periods, right, in the early days of the church, some of them ran to Babylon because they found safety there. Because this decree that everyone should respect the God of Daniel. So because they're Jews, they were left alone. And not only were they left alone, but when there was some political instability in the Parthian Empire, and the kingmakers, the Magi, wanted to appoint a new king, they saw some signs that caused them to realize that the great king of the Jews, that the Jews have been waiting on for hundreds of years, is about to be born. And that king of the Jews will be our king. Let's go and honor him. And that terrified Herod. So this action actually led to some of us knowing Christ today. Because when the Jews and the Romans tried to wipe out Christianity in the earlies, some of the Christians, some of them fled to Africa, and some of them fled to Babylon, and they got shelter there. So continuing, and verse 28. So this Daniel, now at this stage, Daniel is a very old man. He's coming up to the end of his life. But it says this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So Darius was the king of Babylon under Cyrus. Under Cyrus. So you want to prosper in life? You want to prosper in general? You want to be promoted? Be faithful to Yahweh. Love what Yahweh loves, hate what Yahweh hates, and Yahweh will prosper you. Because Yahweh has a plan, and He has a plan for all of mankind to bring us to peace to bring us to prosperity, and to continue with what He made us for in the first place. So, this is not the end of the book of Daniel, but this is the end of the first part of the book of Daniel. And the first part of the book of Daniel, while there are prophecies in there, those prophecies are largely hidden. And we'll try to get to them later on. But the first part is mostly history. The second part is all prophecy. And that's where we go to next. So, this has been Daniel chapter 6. Look out for Daniel chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you, and God bless.